What if the smartest kid in the room was the one no one listened to? He built the entire project, wrote every line of code, but someone else took the credit. They thought he'd stay silent until his app crashed live, and only he could fix it. This isn't just a story about coding. It's about ownership, justice, and a quiet black teen who turned the system upside down. If this story moved you, help us reach 1,000 subscribers so we can keep creating more stories that matter. Every sub gives us the motivation to keep going, and to keep telling the ones no one else is telling. The moment the door creaked open, the entire classroom seemed to hold its breath. Mr. Anders walked in with his usual sharpness, gray tie perfectly knotted, clipboard in hand, and eyes scanning the room like a hawk seeking its prey. It was Friday afternoon, and the air in the old public school building in Pinebrook, Texas, was thick with the scent of sweat, pencil shavings, and end-of-week fatigue. The clatter of keyboards and murmurs of half-hearted chatter instantly died down. Without warning, Mr. Anders slammed a thick textbook onto the desk at the front, the sound cutting through the silence like a thunderclap. "If you're as brilliant as you think, Navarro, show us. Solve this." Every head turned. Eli Navarro, the lanky 16-year-old in the third row near the wall, looked up slowly from his spiral-bound notebook. He blinked behind his cracked glasses. His hoodie sleeves were pushed halfway up his forearms, revealing a mess of ink smudges and faint graphite marks that told stories of long nights filled with formulas and code. Eli wasn't the kind of student who volunteered. He wasn't loud. He didn't try to make friends. Most days, he buried his head in a worn-out laptop covered in faded stickers, Python, Ubuntu, and a blue sticker that read, "I debug, therefore I am." The class twisted in their seats to watch him, some smirking, others nudging each other as if to say, "This is going to be good." Everyone knew Mr. Anders didn't like being challenged, and earlier that week, Eli had dared to question the logic of one of his problem sets. Politely, but clearly. It hadn't gone unnoticed. Now, the teacher had drawn a complex, multivariable equation across the whiteboard, one that mixed trigonometric functions, nested fractions, and a trick layer of logic error. It looked more like a trap than a question, one designed to prove a point, one meant to humble. Eli stared at the board. His heart thudded, not from fear, but from familiarity. Challenges like these were puzzles to him, whispers from the universe asking to be solved. But this wasn't just any puzzle. This was personal. From the back row, someone muttered, "Bet he freezes." Another student whispered, "He always looks smart. Let's see if he really is." Eli's fingers tightened around his pen. His knee bounced under the desk. The weight of the room shifted, pressing on his chest. He could feel Mr. Anders' stare, piercing, expectant, daring him to fail. The classroom walls, covered in faded posters of historical mathematicians and inspirational quotes, suddenly felt like they were closing in. He took a breath, slow and deep, the kind his abuela taught him when anxiety would wrap around his lungs at night like a vice. Outside the window, the fall sun filtered through dusty blinds, casting long diagonal shadows across the room. Somewhere down the block, the hum of a freight train echoed faintly, a reminder that Pinebrook was the kind of town where nothing ever changed, except maybe right now. Eli stood up, slowly, quietly. His chair scraped softly against the tiled floor. He didn't speak. He walked toward the board, his sneakers making the faintest scuffing sound. The whole class watched, waiting for him to stutter, hesitate, or crumble. But Eli wasn't thinking about the eyes on him. He was thinking about the numbers, the symmetry, the subtle inconsistencies in the equation that hinted at misdirection, like bad code pretending to be clean. He picked up the dry erase marker, tested it on the corner of the board, and drew a clean vertical line through the middle of the equation. Someone snickered. Mr. Anders crossed his arms. Eli didn't flinch. This wasn't about showing off. It wasn't about proving the teacher wrong. It was about reclaiming something, quietly, boldly, through logic. He began writing. First step, isolate the inner expression. The nested function wasn't just complex, it was flawed. A denominator that could be simplified through rational conjugates. Eli's eyes scanned each layer like reading code. In his mind, he wasn't in a classroom. He was in a debugging session, each line a step closer to clarity. Students leaned forward. They didn't understand what he was doing yet, but something about the confidence in his movement made them pause, made them wonder. Mr. Anders, on the other hand, was frowning. He didn't like what he saw, not because Eli was wrong, but because he might be right. And right now, Eli Navarro wasn't playing by the rules. He was rewriting them. Eli's marker glided across the board, each stroke deliberate, each symbol a declaration. The chaos of the original equation began to take shape, not by following the standard sequence of steps Mr. Anders drilled into the class, but by unraveling it through patterns Eli had taught himself to see. His classmates had gone silent. Even the habitual whisperers at the back, Mason and Devon, leaned in now, their usual smirks faded into curiosity. Eli, the boy with duct tape on his backpack and dirt on his shoes, was doing something no one expected. He paused briefly, not out of uncertainty, but to let the logic unfold. He saw the trick hidden within the nested function, how a variable cancellation left behind a simpler trigonometric identity. Something about the structure of the equation reminded him of a recursive function he'd written just last night to compress data sequences in a project he was building for fun. He smiled faintly. A soft cough broke the silence. Mr. Anders cleared his throat. "This isn't how I taught it," he said, the words slicing into the air like a cold wind. Eli nodded slightly without turning. "I know," he replied quietly. It was the first time he'd spoken since standing. "I'm not solving it your way." Gasps fluttered like nervous birds across the classroom. No one talked to Mr. Anders like that. Not even the valedictorian candidates. Not even the star athletes who were normally allowed to coast through tough questions. Eli didn't say it to provoke. It wasn't defiance, it was just the truth. And truth, when spoken plainly, carries its own kind of power. Mr. Anders stepped closer, arms folded. "So, what are you doing then, Navarro?" "Teaching your own math class now." Eli turned slightly, his expression unreadable. "No," he said. "Just trying something different." He returned to the board. His marker moved again, crossing out parts of the original equation, circling new pathways, annotating like a coder explaining a script. Each transformation was elegant, minimal. A few students began to murmur softly, nudging each other. "Wait, he's actually getting somewhere. I think it makes sense." And for the first time, someone added quietly, "This is kind of cool." Eli didn't hear any of it, not fully. He was deep inside the problem now, like a diver beneath the waves, following a thread of logic through the depths. He remembered nights in his trailer, with a creaky, oscillating fan buzzing above, and his little brother asleep beside him, while he scrolled through open-source forums, studying how algorithms solved real-world puzzles. The same focus he had then, he had now. This equation wasn't a trap, it was a puzzle. And puzzles, unlike people, didn't judge. He isolated a complex identity, simplified it, and folded the outer structure back into itself like origami, layer by layer, shape emerging from chaos. He underlined the final step, capped the marker and stepped back. Done. No dramatic flourish, no smile, just completion. The class stared. Mason's jaw slackened slightly. Devon tilted his head. Even Mr. Anders stood still, lips tight, brow furrowed. He walked to the board, eyes scanning each line like a drill sergeant inspecting gear. He didn't speak. He checked the original equation, then the final result, then the process. Finally, his eyes flicked to Eli. That's not incorrect. It wasn't praise, but it wasn't dismissal either. In Mr. Anders' vocabulary, that was practically applause. The room buzzed. Maria, a girl who usually stayed quiet and spent most of her time sketching in the back row, leaned forward and whispered, "That was insane." A low wave of whispers passed through the room like a ripple. Eli said nothing. He returned to his seat, sat down slowly, and opened his notebook. His hands trembled slightly, not from nerves, but from the energy of having stood up for something that mattered. He didn't look around. He didn't need to, because something had shifted, not just in the classroom, but inside him. As Eli settled back into his seat, the hum of murmured conversations began to grow. The sharp edge of tension had dulled, replaced by something more fragile, uncertainty, confusion, even curiosity. Some students exchanged glances. Others pretended not to care, but their sideways glances at Eli gave them away. Mr. Anders turned to erase the board, his motions stiff, deliberate. He didn't say another word about the solution. Whether he was impressed, unsettled, or challenged, no one could say. But his silence spoke volumes. For the rest of the class, time trudged on. Pages turned, pencils scratched, but something about the air had changed. Eli didn't try to analyze it. He just focused on his notes, quietly sketching out the logical branches that had led to his answer. He wasn't trying to brag. He just needed to see it one more time, to prove to himself it hadn't been a fluke. When the bell finally rang, a sound that usually brought collective relief, it was met with hesitation. No one bolted for the door. Instead, students lingered. As Eli packed up, someone approached. Maria. She stood awkwardly at the edge of his desk, clutching her sketchbook against her chest. "That was really impressive," she said, almost too soft to hear. Eli looked up, blinked, and nodded. "Thanks." He wasn't used to people talking to him unless it was to borrow a charger or ask for notes. Maria hesitated. "You didn't just solve it? You saw something no one else did." Eli shrugged lightly. "I just looked at it sideways." That made her smile. "I think sideways is underrated." She walked away before he could respond, leaving behind a strange warmth in his chest. Not excitement, not embarrassment, just recognition, something unfamiliar. He left the classroom quietly, the strap of his worn-out backpack slung over one shoulder. The hallway buzzed with life. Lockers slammed, sneakers squeaked. Friends laughed. But Eli walked through it like he always did. Alone, unnoticed. Only this time it felt different. There were glances, curious ones, not mocking, not hostile, just interested. He passed Mason and Devon near the water fountain. They didn't say anything, but they didn't smirk either. In Eli's world, that was progress. By the time he reached the bike rack outside, the wind had picked up. Leaves rustled along the pavement. The school's flag snapped softly in the breeze. Eli climbed onto his rusty blue bike, 2 gears short of functioning, and pedaled toward home. Pinebrook was quiet in the late afternoon. A town of truck stops, metal sheds, and diners that hadn't changed their menus since the 70s. The kind of place where people stayed unless something forced them out. Eli didn't hate it, but he often felt like he didn't quite belong in it either. He lived in a trailer park just past the train yard, a row of tin-roofed homes lined up like dominoes. His was number 12. Small, dented, but clean. His abuela kept a small garden out front, tomatoes, peppers, and a lone basil plant that somehow refused to die. He parked the bike, grabbed the mail, and stepped inside. The air smelled of warm tortillas and lemon cleaner. "You're home early," Abuela called from the tiny kitchen. Eli dropped his bag on the couch and peeked in. She was stirring something in a pot, her silver hair tied in a loose bun, hands moving with practiced grace. "Yeah," he said. "Had kind of a big moment today." She turned, one eyebrow raised. "Did someone finally notice you're smarter than them?" He chuckled. "Something like that." He told her what happened. Not the whole thing, not the feelings, but the facts, the challenge, the solution, the silence. Abuela listened without interrupting, then turned down the heat and wiped her hands. "You've always had a mind built like a lockpick," she said. "You just needed the right door." Eli sat at the small table, resting his chin in his palm. It didn't feel like I won," he admitted. "Just like I didn't lose." She nodded. "Sometimes that's the first step, getting people to stop and look, to think. That's more power than most ever hold." He thought about that as he stared at the bubbling pot. Maybe today wasn't a victory, but it was something better, a beginning. The following Monday, Eli walked into school with his hoodie pulled low and headphones in his ears. The music wasn't playing. He just needed a buffer between him and the world. But the world, it seemed, had noticed. "Yo, Navarro!" someone called from the lockers near the cafeteria. Eli glanced up, startled. It was Marcus, varsity football, king of loud jokes. He rarely spoke to Eli, ever. "That math thing, that was wild, man." Eli gave a half nod, unsure what to say. By the time he reached his locker, 2 more students had acknowledged him. Not mockingly, not sarcastically, with genuine respect. He wasn't used to it. By third period, whispers followed him into every room. Navarro cracked the Anders equation. I heard Mr. Anders had to double-check his answer at home. Someone said he might submit it to the district contest. None of it was confirmed, but that didn't stop the stories from growing. Maria passed him a note in AP English. "You might be a legend now. Hope you're ready." He folded the note slowly, slipped it into his notebook, and pretended not to smile. But beneath the quiet exterior, something had shifted. Eli didn't feel invincible, far from it, but he didn't feel invisible anymore either. At lunch, he took his usual seat under the window near the vending machine, where no one else sat. He liked the solitude, the view of the track field, the white noise. But this time, someone joined him. Maria. She sat without asking, unwrapping a sandwich as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "You don't mind, do you?" Eli shook his head. "Number? It's fine." They ate in silence for a minute. Then Maria pulled out her sketchbook. "You ever notice how equations have rhythms?" Eli looked at her, intrigued. "Rhythms?" "Yeah," she said, flipping to a page of intersecting lines and shapes. "Like, when I draw patterns based on math, fractals, symmetry, the golden ratio, they feel like music, like there's a beat in the way things unfold." Eli blinked. Yeah, I know what you mean." He told her about the way he visualized code, how recursion felt like echoes, how algorithms had crescendos and resolutions like symphonies. And just like that, they were talking. Not small talk, not shallow filler, but real conversation, something neither of them was used to. By the end of lunch, Maria looked at him and said, "You're not what I expected." "Neither are you," Eli admitted. For the first time in years, the rest of the day passed quickly. That afternoon, Mr. Anders called Eli to stay after class. The classroom emptied, chairs scraping, backpacks thudding. When the door closed behind the last student, the silence returned. Mr. Anders stood at his desk, arms folded. "I reviewed your solution again," he said. "You found an approach I hadn't considered." Eli stayed quiet. "That doesn't happen often." Still, Eli said nothing. Mr. Anders walked to the board, picked up a marker, and underlined one of Eli's intermediate steps. "This transformation, it's non-standard." Eli nodded. "It's something I pieced together from open-source problem sets. It's not in our textbook." Mr. Anders looked at him for a long moment. "Would you be interested in entering the State Math Invitational as a representative of Pinebrook?" Eli blinked. "What?" "It's selective. Most schools don't even qualify. But with your method, and if you're willing to explain it in writing, we might have a shot." Eli swallowed hard. I'd have to think about it." Mr. Anders nodded. "Of course, but I need an answer by Friday." Eli walked out of the room with his mind spinning. He had always worked in shadows, in silence, on problems no one assigned him. Now someone wanted to spotlight that, to use his work, maybe even reward it. It was overwhelming. When he got home that evening, Abuela was on the porch sipping tea from her chipped mug. "You look like you saw a ghost," she said without looking up. "Worse," Eli muttered. "I saw potential." She laughed, a soft, proud sound. "That's scarier than ghosts sometimes." He sat next to her, watching the wind bend the tops of the trees. In his pocket, Maria's note pressed against his leg like a second heartbeat. For the first time, the door was open. But stepping through it would require more than solving equations. It would mean choosing to be seen. The rest of the week passed in a blur. Every hallway felt narrower, every conversation louder. Eli had always navigated school like a ghost, unseen, untouched, unnoticed. But now the spotlight was uncomfortably real. Posters for the State Math Invitational appeared on the bulletin boards. A few students asked him if he'd really been invited. One even asked if he'd tutor them. He didn't say yes, but he didn't say no either. By Wednesday night, Eli sat alone in the dim light of the kitchen, flipping through his notes. The pages were filled with equations, logic trees, algorithm sketches. But for the first time in a long while, the numbers didn't bring peace. They brought pressure. He stared at the form Mr. Anders had handed him. The deadline was 2 days away. All he had to do was sign it. That's it, and yet he kept hearing the voice of doubt. You only got lucky once. What if you can't do it again? What if they all expect you to be brilliant and you disappoint them? The whisper was relentless. He slammed his notebook shut and stood. The trailer felt too small, too hot. He stepped outside into the crisp night air. Stars blinked faintly above the town's hazy glow. The distant howl of a train reminded him the world kept moving, with or without him. He needed a distraction. Eli ducked into the tiny back room, the one where his old computer sat. Scratched desk, tangled cables, and an outdated keyboard with 3 missing keys. He powered it on, not to study, but to build. He opened his terminal window, began typing, and got lost in code. The hours slipped away. He was building a new type of puzzle generator, something he'd dreamed of but never had time for. A program that didn't just create math problems, but personalized them based on how people thought. Adaptive, intuitive, challenging. A teacher in a box, built by a student. By midnight, the prototype was working, and for the first time that week, Eli smiled. The next morning, tired but focused, he approached Mr. Anders after class. "I'll enter the invitational," he said. The teacher nodded. "Good. But I want to do it on my terms." Anders raised an eyebrow. "What does that mean?" Eli took a breath. "I want to submit my own problem set as part of the application. Something different, something real." Mr. Anders hesitated, then gave the slightest nod. "Show me what you've got." That afternoon, Eli worked through lunch, sketching out a prototype of his adaptive puzzle system. Not just to impress, but to prove, to himself most of all, that he had something worth saying. Meanwhile, word of his decision spread. Maria found him in the library during 7th period and slid into the seat across from him. "You're doing it," she said, voice low but warm. "Yeah." "Scared?" He nodded, terrified. "Good," she replied, grinning. "Means it matters." They sat in silence, side by side, the way people do when words aren't needed. At home that night, Eli showed the prototype to his abuela. He expected confusion, but instead she leaned forward, eyes shining. "You built this?" she whispered. "Still a rough version," he said. "But yeah." She nodded slowly. "You know, some people wait their whole lives for a moment to prove who they are." Eli swallowed hard. "And you?" she added, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You've already had yours. Now this. This is what comes after." He looked at the screen, at the scrolling lines of code, the pulse of logic running through the interface. For the first time, Eli didn't just want to win the competition. He wanted to rewrite how people learned to think. The day of the state math invitational arrived faster than Eli expected. He woke before dawn, the sky still dark and silent outside his window. His abuela had already packed his backpack, water bottle, protein bars, and a folded slip of paper with a handwritten note. "Recuerda quién eres, abuela. Remember who you are." He tucked it into his pocket without reading the rest. Just holding it was enough. At the school parking lot, a yellow bus waited with District 12 Invitational printed in bold across the side. Mr. Anders stood at the door, clipboard in hand, calling names. Eli climbed on last, eyes scanning the rows of unfamiliar students, some in suits, some in school jackets, all quiet with tension. He found an empty seat near the back. Maria hadn't come. She wasn't part of the math team. But as the bus pulled away, he saw her standing across the lot, arms folded, sketchbook clutched tightly to her chest. She gave him a small salute with her fingers. He smiled faintly, then turned to the window. The ride was long, over an hour through dry plains and quiet suburbs. Eli spent it reviewing his problem set, fingers drumming against his knees, trying to chase away the whispering voice of doubt. "You're out of your league. These kids go to academies. They've had tutors since they were 5. But beneath that voice, another one echoed louder. "You've seen things they haven't. You solve problems not from memory, but from instinct. You've built solutions from nothing." The bus pulled up to a modern glass building, the Oak Ridge Academic Center. It gleamed under the rising sun like something out of a tech campus. The banner read, "State Math Invitational, where logic meets brilliance." Eli stepped off the bus and into a sea of polished students, coaches, cameras, and clipboards. The air buzzed with competition. Mr. Anders handed him a schedule. "You're in room 4B. First round is individual logic reconstruction." Eli nodded and followed the signs inside. Room 4B was sterile. White walls, fluorescent lights, rows of chrome laptops. The proctor explained the rules. Timed problems, increasing difficulty, instant feedback, no calculators, no notes. The moment the clock started, Eli's fingers flew across the keyboard. The first problem, a set of cascading inequalities, took less than a minute. The second, a probability twist, required mapping a logic tree. The third was unfamiliar, almost malicious in its complexity. But Eli didn't panic. He leaned into the challenge. His fingers moved with a rhythm born not from rote learning, but from nights spent debugging broken scripts, deciphering broken logic, learning to see what others missed. By the time he reached the final question, he was drenched in sweat, but focused. It wasn't just math anymore, it was storytelling, flow, movement. He solved the last line with 3 seconds left. A notification popped up. Section complete. Results pending. The room was silent except for the ticking of the analog clock. Eli exhaled. Then came the team round. 6 students per table, randomly assigned. Eli's group included 2 prep school students in tailored suits, a girl with noise-canceling headphones, and a tall boy who barely made eye contact. They were assigned a real-world problem. Optimize a city's emergency response routing algorithm under stress constraints. The others began bickering immediately, debating which method was best, arguing about models, disagreeing on terminology. Eli watched, listened. Then, calmly, he reached into his bag, pulled out a flash drive, and said, "I've actually been building something like this. It's not perfect, but it might help." They stared at him. One scoffed, "You brought code?" Eli nodded. "I don't memorize theory, I build things. This maps traffic load in real time based on variable incidents." The girl with the headphones leaned over, curious. "Show me." Within minutes, they were running Eli's program, modifying it, plugging in scenarios. The room shifted, the arguing stopped. The team started working like an actual team. By the time their timer ended, the proctor raised an eyebrow at their result. "You solved the primary scenario and the bonus optimization. That's rare." The suit-wearing boys looked at Eli, stunned. He just shrugged. "I guess building sideways pays off." The final bell rang. The judges had deliberated for nearly an hour. Students milled about the courtyard outside the auditorium, some nervously reviewing their performance, others already celebrating. Eli stood off to the side, hands buried in his hoodie pocket, eyes fixed on the screen above the auditorium stage where results would be posted. He wasn't sure what he was hoping for. Victory, recognition, or maybe just proof to himself that he belonged here. Maria's sketchbook page flashed through his mind, swirling shapes, looping arrows, a pattern labeled "How Eli Thinks." It had made him laugh when she gave it to him yesterday, but now it felt like armor. Something that reminded him that his mind, unusual, quiet, nonlinear, had value. Suddenly, the crowd shifted. The screen lit up. Individual results: first place, Parker Liu, Academy West; second place, Eli Navarro, Pinebrook High; third place, Samira Raj, Hillstone STEM. The air around Eli thickened. Gasps rippled through the crowd. "Wait, who's Navarro? Isn't that the kid with the hoodie? Where the hell is Pinebrook?" Mr. Anders walked over, expression unreadable, then extended his hand. "You just put our school on the map." Eli shook it, but his gaze was still on the screen. Then the team results appeared. Team Scenario Challenge. Highest optimization score, Team 4B, Navarro, Chen, Delgado, Patel. His name was on that list too. He hadn't just placed. He had helped lead a team of strangers to the top spot by trusting his instincts, by offering something unconventional. The MC stepped up to the mic. "Please welcome to the stage our winners for both categories." Cheers erupted. Applause followed. But as Eli walked toward the front, he didn't see the crowd. He saw Maria's smile, his abuela's hands in flour, his little brother peeking at his computer screen asking, "What's that do?" He took the stage not as the quiet kid in the back row, but as someone who had earned this space. The medal felt heavy on his neck. But it wasn't the weight that moved him. It was the silence afterward, the way people looked at him differently. Not because he'd won, but because they'd seen something unexpected, something real. Later, as the buses loaded to leave, one of the prep school boys from Team 4B approached. "You wrote that code yourself?" he asked. Eli nodded. "From scratch. Got a GitHub?" Eli smirked. "A messy one." The boy laughed. "Messy's where the good stuff lives. Let me know if you ever want to build something real." As the bus rolled back toward Pinebrook, Eli stared out the window, watching the lights blur into the night. He had stepped into the spotlight not by imitating others, but by thinking differently, by choosing to trust the quiet parts of himself, by writing his own way in a world of pre-written answers. When the bus pulled back into Pinebrook, the stars had taken over the sky. The parking lot was mostly empty, but one figure stood waiting beneath the yellow glow of a flickering lamp. "Abuela." She waved when she saw him, her faded shawl fluttering like a flag of quiet pride. Eli stepped off the bus, medal tucked in his pocket, and walked into her hug. "You came," he whispered. "Of course I did," she replied. "You came back different." That night, over warm tortillas and cinnamon tea, Eli told her everything. Not just the results, but the moment when the team listened, when the code worked, when he stopped doubting what made him different. She listened like it was a prayer. In the days that followed, word spread. Pinebrook High hadn't had a state-level math winner in decades. Mr. Anders wrote a special bulletin for the front office. The principal invited Eli to speak at the next assembly. A local reporter came to interview him, called him the algorithm kid. But Eli wasn't chasing fame. He had already turned back to his code. Now, he wasn't building puzzles just for himself. He was creating an online platform, a space for students like him who didn't fit into textbook logic or traditional methods, where kids could explore patterns, solve real-world problems, and feel seen. He called it Sideways. Because sometimes, he explained on the homepage, the straight path isn't the smartest. Maria designed the logo, a looping infinity symbol drawn like a sideways 8 with one path breaking out of the loop. It wasn't long before students from other towns logged in. They left comments. Finally, something that makes sense. "I didn't know math could feel like this. This platform sees me." Eli responded to every message, and each time he remembered the moment in Mr. Anders' classroom when the board became a battleground, and then a breakthrough. One afternoon, Maria stopped by his trailer with a sketch. It was him, standing at the board, chalk in hand, eyes clear. At the bottom, she'd written, "You changed the rules so the rest of us could play." He hung it above his desk, not as a trophy, but as a reminder that the quietest kids often carry the loudest truths. That brilliance isn't loud, it's persistent, and that sometimes all it takes to change the world is one brave mind refusing to be invisible. Malik Carter didn't fight with words. He let his work speak, and when it finally did, it changed lives. From forgotten student to tech innovator, his story proves you don't have to be loud to make noise. So the next time someone overlooks your talent, remember Malik. Build anyway, speak through action, drop a comment below. What's something you created that no one believed in until it worked? Like this video if Malik inspired you. Subscribe to help us hit 1,000 subs and share more untold stories of quiet brilliance, because the world needs to hear them.